So for a while now, I've been wanting a tach on my Volkswagen bus. Back in 1967, these cars did not come with a tachometer. I guess they didn't really think that you were gonna be looking at your RPM gauge. It was kind of just listen to the engine and know when to shift. But now with this more powerful engine, I get up to speed a lot faster and it revs up a lot quicker. And I just like to know when I'm at optimum cruising RPMs or whatever, especially since I have a transmission that is completely original. I don't have a freeway flyer transmission or anything like that. And I still have gear reduction boxes on my bus, which makes the torque a lot higher, but the RPM is also a lot higher on the highway. So a while back, I bought a tachometer and a place to hold it because I didn't want to drill into my dash. These both come from air-cooled accessories. I'm not really sure how well they're gonna work or if I'm gonna have to do any messing around with them to make them work. I know for a fact that this little bracket that I'm gonna show you in a second doesn't really fit the steering column 100%. The hole for the steering column bracket is a little bit larger than my steering column on the bus. So I'm gonna have to either make some sort of little adapter or maybe just put a little bit of like rubber or something around that inner space just to fill up the gap so it doesn't slide down the steering column. So yeah, let's unbox these things and throw them on the car. So I'm looking at the instruction guide on how to assemble this this light, and it actually tells me what wire gauge I should be using. It says to use 18 gauge wire and shielded crimp style connectors for all connections. So I'm gonna go ahead and go on Amazon. I'm gonna get myself some 18 gauge wire, some black and red spools of wire. I'm gonna try to find the thickest insulated wires I can just because I'm running it on the outside of the bus, and even though I'm planning on running it within some sort of like rubber conduit type of thing, I'm going to need to just make sure that nothing rubs on anything metal and gets cut. All right, so it's been about a day and I got my wire here. So these wires actually have a silicone sleeve on the outside instead of just like regular rubber one, and it's supposed to help with like abrasion resistance, and they're just supposed to be a little bit tougher, a little more durable. And since these are going to be run on the outside of the car, I want them to be as durable as possible. And also, since they're going to be running the outside of the car, I went ahead and got this, which is kind of like a little sleeve material that I'm going to be running as kind of like a conduit next to probably the air conditioning lines all the way to the back of the car. All right, so now we can just take this gauge and go out to the bus and see how this installs onto the steering column. Okay, so we're here in the bus and got our little clip thing here. So this is gonna clip around somewhere above the support here, but low enough that I can see it so that it doesn't interfere with my key on this side. Somewhere like right there. Might actually be a better idea just because I have the turning signal on this side, which this rotates a lot, which I need to take this apart and sand down the ends to make it so that it doesn't slide around anymore. But yeah, it's a different problem for a different day. This is gonna end up going on this side, right about there, because I don't think it'll interfere with the key at all. I don't really have to reach around it too much. I'll just push it to the forward position as much as possible, so probably like right around here.
The first problem I had to deal with was making that clamp that was way too wide fit around the steering column.
I mean, in reality, I could probably actually just cut this piece of metal, bend it, and drill another hole in it. Right about there. So yeah, so I bent it to where it needs to be. It needs to be about there. Let's take this off. It's be like about there. So I'm just gonna cut this here, pop a new hole in it, and it should be good. Hole is gonna be probably right about here. Let's bend this nice and even. That looks pretty good. Around again. Let's get a hole punch going through here. All right. That should fit now. Perfect. We also can cut this rubber so it's the correct size. Okay, that's looking much better. Let's go ahead and try to put it on the steering column. I can put this onto the column. Alright. Back it up a little bit. That should be okay right there. So, right there. So this should pop right in there. I think I'm gonna wait, so I'll wire it up out here, make sure everything's correct, and then I'll pop it in. But it'll go right about there. I can see it relatively well. My knee isn't gonna hit it, so I think this is a perfect place for it.
Now that the bracket's in place, let's get to the wiring. This gauge is backlit, and to make the dimmer work with it, we need to wire the bulb to the gauges already on the bus.
So one of these is going to be positive, and it'll hook up to the light at the fuel gauge. So I was just reading the manual, and I was wondering what this 4, 6, and 8 are on the back of this thing. And I found out that this gauge is to work on either a 4-cylinder, a 6-cylinder, or an 8-cylinder. So we're just going to make sure that the thing is on 4, because we got a 4-cylinder.
First things first, let's get that light hooked up.
And the way that I'm going to run this light is I'm going to hook it into the power supply for the fuel gauge light. That way it's running off the same fuse as the rest of the dash lights, and it also will turn on and off when I turn my lights on and off.
I decided to also order some piggyback connectors for all the connections to the fuses and original wiring harness. That way I won't actually be altering any of the original connectors or wires. They won't get here for a few days though, so some things like the backlight won't be fully connected until then. In order to get the wires through the dashboard easily, I tied the end of the wire to a zip tie, kind of like threading a needle, and pushed it through the hole under the dash, grabbing it from inside the dash under the speedometer. This will be the ground wire, so it'll be attaching to a screw somewhere on the dashboard.
Okay, this is going to be our ground.
To make sure nothing chafes and to make the wires look a little more tidy, I'm putting some heat shrink over all the wires coming through the dash to the gauge. Hopefully I can get the wires all in one wrap so that it looks similar to the signal wires on the other side of the steering column.
So I got the ground connector on, and I'm going to go ahead and plug this into the back of the light on the fuel gauge just to make sure everything is working correctly and that this light dims and everything when it should. Well, that looks awesome. I really cannot wait to get all this stuff together. Now, I did put the green filter type of thing over the light, and I'm not really sure it matches 100% with the rest of the gauges. I might end up just taking that off and leaving it as a yellow light bulb. I don't know, for now it's okay. I don't really care about it too much. Now I just need to wire up the coil and some other things to the fuse box. So I've installed the ground wire. I just put it to the same screw that I put the ground for the light bulb to, and I have run the wire that will go to the fuse box from the ignition point on the gauge. I actually redid the little crimp connector that was in the middle there because I just really do not like those crimp connectors that kind of like leave the plastic end so big, and to me they don't look as good as having like a nice heat shrink wrapped area. So I've bought some new connectors that are kind of like, I guess, more professional. They'll just look a lot better underneath that shrink wrap that'll go down the steering column on the side just for that short distance. Just because there won't be like big bulges underneath the shrink wrap where the plastic insulation is. Put a little bit of shrink wrap here on this wire that'll go to the fuse box for ignition power, right where it goes through the dashboard. And that's just to protect it a little more because the dashboard is made of metal and it has to go through this little pan. But it actually looks like there's an empty spot on my fuse box, and I think I'm gonna use it to use the ignition on. The only thing I need to make sure is that it doesn't have power right now with the ignition off. And I think that an easy way of doing that is just taking the power source for the light in the gauge and just plugging it up to it just to see. So that looks good. I think that doesn't get power until the key is turned. So since it's on ignition power, that's the fuse that I'm gonna use to run the power to the gauge. All right, that wire has been plugged into the fuse box and everything looks really good. Now, the next wire and the last wire is the one that goes from this gauge all the way back to the coil in the engine compartment. That's the one wire that's gonna be a bit of a pain. Now, I think that what I'm gonna end up doing is running the wire the same way that I just ran the red wire that we just did for the ignition. And I'm gonna run it down to where the air conditioning lines go through the floor here in the front. I'm gonna run it all the way to the back the same way that I've run the compressor lines. So it'll go from here to the condenser in the middle of the car and then all the way to the back where those lines come through the tins, and then I'll run it up to the coil. Now I think that since this coil is a little bit different, I'm gonna have to do a little bit of research to figure out how the coil works, because it's not one of those blue coils that normal engines have. And I'm pretty sure that I need to plug it into the side of the coil that has 3 open prongs on it right now, so I shouldn't actually need to use another piggyback. I'm still gonna need one for the instrument lighting, but for right now, I think that it's just good to get it running. So I'm gonna go ahead and run a black wire all the way to the back just because I want it to match a little bit better. And I think that it's supposed to go to the negative side of the coil, but I'm gonna have to be sure about that.
I ran the sleeve and the wire through the passenger side frame and up through the tins in the engine compartment. Back to the engine, we've got my wire for the coil, and it needs to be plugged into the top part of the coil here, which is the negative side. I think it should be pretty simple. Just need to cut this wire to the correct size. It's about right there. All right, looks good. Crimp it. There's the crimpage right there. All right, perfect. Now we just plug it in. Well, actually, first, and then we gotta do this heat shrink. Go ahead. All right, we're good. Now let's just plug it in. Let's get the key in, turn the ignition, and see if anything blows up. Well, that is the brightest light in the world, but it is what it is. So everything has been plugged in. We ran the wires to the back of the car, put them onto the coil. Everything is installed correctly right now. Hopefully it just works. It's very laid out right now. The piggyback connector for the light should be here. They said by 10. I don't really know what time it is right now. My phone is
using the light for my phone. So hopefully the piggyback connector will be here tonight and I'll be able to just plug it in and have the dashboard lights work. But for right now, I guess we're just running without dashboard lights just to see if everything is plugged in correctly, and I can maybe put back the plastic panel for the front, but I might wait until it's actually light out to do that.
That's weird. It's connected to your lights.
So last night when I ended up trying the gauge for the first time, I noticed that it only works when the lights are on, and I have a feeling it's because I must have connected it to a fuse that I thought was ignition on power, but really what it is when your light switch is on power. So I'm gonna need to connect it to a different fuse, and I know which fuse I'm gonna connect it to. It's the same one that I've used for all of the accessories. And so instead of, again, cutting into any of that wiring, I'll just put this piggyback crimp connector on the end of that wire. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. The gauge works, everything is good. So if you've made it this far into the video and you want to see more of this type of content with the split bus or Vanagons or Beetles or, you know, whatever else we can get ourselves into, please think about subscribing and liking this video and commenting. If you see anything that I did that's blatantly wrong or anything like that, please let me know, because I am in no way an expert. We'll definitely be doing more things like this in the future. So thanks again for watching. See you later.